A woman named Margaret Oyelaran sat in a worn armchair in her cottage on the coast of Maine on a Tuesday morning in March of 2037 with a 14-year-old calico cat named Biscuit pressed against her chest. This was not unusual. Biscuit had been doing this for 3 years, ever since Margaret retired from 31 years as a lighthouse keeper and moved into the small cottage at the base of the tower. What was unusual was the pattern. Biscuit did not do this every day. She did this on some days and not others, at some hours and not others, and when Margaret finally mentioned it to her doctor, in passing, the doctor asked a question Margaret had never thought to ask. She said, "When exactly does the cat do this? Can you tell me the times?" Margaret could not tell her the times, but her daughter could. Because her daughter, a software engineer in Portland named Adiz, had installed a set of smart home sensors in the cottage 2 years earlier, including a small camera in the living room that logged motion and sound. When Adiz pulled the footage and ran a simple pattern detection script, she found something that made her sit down on her kitchen floor and call her mother immediately. Biscuit's chest-pressing episodes clustered. They clustered at 2:14 in the morning and at 6:47 in the morning and at 11:03 at night. They clustered on days when Margaret reported feeling tired. They clustered on days when Margaret's sleep tracker showed fragmented REM cycles. And when Adiz cross-referenced the timestamps with the cardiac data from her mother's wearable, she found a near-perfect correlation with episodes of atrial fibrillation that Margaret's doctors had never detected, because the episodes were short and silent and came only when Margaret was at rest. This is not science fiction. Or rather, it is not science fiction for much longer. Cats have been doing something humans could not measure for a very long time. In 2001, a study published in the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America measured the frequency of domestic cat purrs and found that they fall in a range between 25 and 50 hertz, the exact range that has been shown, in separate research, to promote bone density and tissue repair in humans. The researchers did not claim that cats purr in order to heal. They simply noted that the frequency was, biologically, therapeutic. In 2021, a widely reported study from the University of Minnesota found that cat owners had a 40% lower risk of death from heart attack than non-cat owners, even after controlling for other factors. The mechanism was unclear. The correlation was not. The tools to understand what cats were actually doing arrived slowly, and then all at once. In 2019, researchers at UC Davis began a longitudinal study pairing elderly cardiac patients with shelter cats, tracking both the cat's behavior and the patient's heart rhythms over 3 years. The results were unexpected. Cats did not distribute their attention evenly. They gravitated toward patients during specific cardiac events, silent arrhythmias, blood pressure spikes, episodes of atrial fibrillation that the patients themselves could not feel. The cats were not cuddling at random. They were responding to something. The question was what? By 2030, the answer was becoming clear. Cats, it turned out, could hear human heartbeats, not metaphorically, literally. A cat's hearing extends to 64,000 hertz, nearly 2 octaves above the range of human perception. The low-frequency vibrations of a human heart, the subtle irregularities of a skipped beat or a flutter, were not silent to a cat. They were loud. They were, to a cat, the most prominent sound in a quiet room. And cats, who had evolved to detect the heartbeat of prey hidden under snow or behind walls, had spent 10,000 years listening to the hearts of the humans they lived with. They had simply never been able to say what they heard. The first generation of cardiac detection collars arrived in 2033. They were simple devices, a small microphone that recorded the cat's environment, a vibration sensor that tracked when the cat pressed against a human, and an AI model trained on the UC Davis data to flag correlations. The collars did not diagnose. They simply noticed. They noticed when a cat's behavior clustered around specific times. They noticed when a cat's attention to a human increased before a cardiac event. They noticed patterns that no human, no matter how attentive, could have seen. And then they sent a gentle alert to a phone, suggesting that a doctor's visit might be wise. At first, the collars seemed like novelties. tech gadgets for anxious pet owners. But the data told a different story. In the 3 years after the UC Davis partnership went public, emergency cardiac interventions among collar-equipped households dropped by 31%. Not because the cats were treating anything, because the cats were detecting things earlier than any wearable, any symptom, any self-report. They were detecting the shadow of a heart attack 3 days before it arrived. And by the time Margaret Oyelaren's daughter pulled the footage from the cottage camera, Biscuit had been detecting her mother's atrial fibrillation for 2.5 years. This is the part that made Adiz cry on her kitchen floor, not the diagnosis. The diagnosis was good news: atrial fibrillation, caught early, is treatable. The thing that made her cry was the realization of what had already happened. For 2.5 years, while Margaret lived alone in the lighthouse cottage, while Adiz worried from Portland, while the doctors saw nothing in the quarterly checkups, a 14-year-old cat had been keeping watch. Biscuit had not been cuddling. Biscuit had been working. And the work had looked exactly like love, because for a cat, there was no difference. Margaret Oyelaren had the ablation procedure in April of 2037. It was successful. Her cardiologist told her she was lucky to have caught it early, and she said, "I did not catch it. Biscuit caught it." The cardiologist, who had seen the data Adiz had prepared, did not argue. He asked if he could share the case with the UC Davis team. Margaret said yes. She also said, "Biscuit is 14 years old. She will not live forever." And the cardiologist, who had not expected to be moved by a case about a cat, said, "No, but she lived long enough." There's a word for what Biscuit did, but the word is imprecise. The word is love. It is imprecise because love in the human vocabulary is a feeling, and what Biscuit did was not a feeling. It was a practice. A daily, patient, attentive practice of noticing what was wrong and pressing herself against it, again and again, for years, without any expectation that anyone would ever understand what she was doing. The question of whether a cat loves her human is a question about feelings. The better question is whether a cat acts like someone who loves her human. And the answer, in a small cottage on the coast of Maine, in the years when Margaret Oyelaren thought she was alone, was yes. The answer had always been yes. Every tomorrow leaves an echo. Some echoes are made of a heartbeat only a cat could hear. We will be listening for the next one. Next on Echoes of Tomorrow, the algorithm that learned to grieve.